Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People, and I'd like to make this video today. It's a special video that I have in store, but this isn't working right now because I'm not getting a good video on this. Let's try something else.
More from your quirky chode in just a moment.
Yeah, I'll be right back with more quirky chode in a moment. More quirky chode than you can choke on.
Chode quirker.
I'm a chode quirker. They call me Captain Chode Quirk. Okay, now I'm ready to go. Now I'm really ready. Hopefully the video will come out okay. It's a little choppy.
I think they love choppy.
I don't think they love choppy video. Do you love choppy video? If so, welcome to Talking with Famous People. You'll love this episode of Choppy Video. Hey, look, your mouth doesn't line up with the sound. Perfect. Okay, great. Welcome. This is about frames and approaches and other things about cognitive functions. I've decided to make this little document, and I did. It occurred to me that probably what's necessary is for someone to do a meta-analysis of the different approaches people take to typing and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each, and that's what I'm attempting to do right now. Kimberly's helping with sign language. She's doing a sign language translation for me of what I'm saying, so if you're deaf, you can still read this with just looking at her shadow sign language. Alright, the first approach is behavioral. Frame is behavioral. What that means, this is like Mega Bros approach, quirk code. It's data-driven and focused on the expression of functions as the expression is observed. So what that means, and I'm going to get more into Mega Bros thing after I go through this little chart, but basically he says, for example, he commented on the Courtney video that Courtney was engaged in TI plus, and he has an understanding of each function as existing as a positive or negative expression of itself, which I'm not quite sure what exactly that means, but I'm going to go into that, as I said, a little bit more later. So I put that first because it's sort of the topic of the video. The second approach that we see is metaphorical. This is like people like Beebe or C.S. Joseph or Jung, and it's just basically storytelling. They say storytelling, they link individuals to various archetypes. This is the kind of shit that goes like, well, my seventh function is my witch function or my demon function or whatever. Like, they say you understand these aspects of yourself as being representations of ancient human stories that we all express over and over again throughout history or something. That there's nothing really truly unique or particularist about anybody. It's a very NI approach, and it's basically just metaphor, and I don't think it's very meaningful or useful for anything, but whatever. It's got its appeal too. I'm not here to trash any particular style. You should be, in my opinion, people should be aware of the fact that there are these various frames and approaches if they want to understand it more fully, and they can incorporate aspects as they see fit. Mechanical. This is more like a socionics approach where it's just function mechanics drive behavior. So by prioritizing one attentional manner, you deprioritize another necessarily to a certain extent or whatever, and then that's how come a type exists, is because I'm constantly doing ideational stuff, I'm not necessarily doing a great job of keeping track of it, and I'm concurrently not paying a lot of attention to which thing is true. I'm ignoring that, and yada yada yada. Function mechanics approach. A values mechanics approach or a value matrix approach says it understands functions as varying kinds of valuing. For example, my inherent value or my ontological value is novelty because I'm an innate on. My primary instrumental value is logic because I'm a TI tool user. My absolute value for myself is FE. My absolute value for others is NI. That's a value matrix approach. An intertype approach is just relational and says, let's not worry about the how or why of the functions or whatever. Let's just explain why these two people aren't getting along right now in terms of cognitive functions. I think that's a perfectly valid way to go and say we don't need to understand it beyond this except to explain, here's an explanation for why you guys are behaving like this with each other that is potentially very informative, revelatory, and potentially very impactful. I mean, the thing is, I find, Kimberly, do you think this is true that you that understanding cognitive functions helps us get through our potential conflicts and stuff? Or do you think that's not true?
Yeah, for sure.
I think so too.
I mean, like I said from the very, 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 very beginning, it's taught me that, to step back a bit and understand that it's not that somebody's being difficult, it's that some people just clearly don't see things the way that I see them. And I think I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that not everybody sees things like me. And
Well, one of our early exchanges that I remember about cognitive functions was early on you said to me something along the lines of, I know I shouldn't worry so much about what other people think, blah, blah, blah. And I said in response, well, of course you should and do, because you have FE as a tool function. I worry about what other people think too. It's my absolute value. Nothing wrong with that. It's just, that we hear from in the world like, well, don't worry so much about what other people think as sort of a universal value we should all adhere to, but in reality, it's just an expression of an FI prioritization.
Yes, but I think a lot of people forget the last part of, worrying about what people think. You have to also remember that every single person thinks differently, and that sometimes the people that you are worrying about, like for me, I was always so worried about the wrong people. Like I was always worried about what the wrong people thought, and I didn't take that a step further and thought, well, but wait a second, you're basing your reactions off different metrics.
Right.
You have to.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I'm saying?
That's exactly right. You're basing your reactions off different metrics. So it's like, before knowing our cognitive functions, I would probably presume a golden rule approach. Like, well, what this person wants is what I would want if I were that person.
Right.
And after cognitive functions, you are much more aware of a platinum rule approach where you go, well, what does this person actually want? What's actually important to this person? Because the things that are important to me don't seem to be very important to this person. And functions let you kind of recognize that, oh, don't worry about it being socially awkward there, Kim, because that person has polar FE. There's zero chance they picked up on it. That's one example of something that might happen,
Yeah.
So anyway, let's continue on. Physical voltology. This is this idea that people have micro expressions in their face that reveal what their type is.
I know you don't believe in that.
That people can control these, but people who understand voltology can read them. It's not that I don't believe the idea behind it. I agree that it's probably likely that certain attentional manners correlate with certain micro expressions. The problem I have with it is there's no why to it. So there's no third level to the frame that there needs to be. Like with function mechanics, you go, well, it relates to other functions like this because of certain definitional realities to it. And you can understand that somebody with dominant any and second function ti is not going to have very much effectiveness with introverted feeling, for example. But if I do voltology and go, well, this microexpression occurs, and that means this other microexpression won't because they're somehow definitionally exclusive. That's not the case. And people have different sorts of microexpressions, different circumstances, and that may be the case for anybody with any kind of function analysis, but like polar in E doesn't go away. It's always there. If I talk to an ISTP, they're not going to be able to generate a bunch of ideas on the fly no matter how many times I test them. Whereas their microexpressions, as far as I know, might change. Plus, two different people, I can't get out of anybody a clear playbook that I can rely on that says, if you see this, it's definitively not this. You need to be able to do something that's eliminatory in order to make progress in terms of typing people. And the last frame for typing is just types, and that's how most people enter into it. And I don't want to poo-poo it, because that's how I entered into it too. I read type descriptions and went, oh, that's me. You know, wow, I didn't know I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't know I was just a less common type, so I don't encounter many people like me, you know.
Oh, there's Brittany.
But see, that's the problem with that approach, though, too, is that people get confused then, and they think that the type is the thing rather than the type being a description of a matrix of attentional manners. So let's get on to these next things. The positive and negative expressions. Like, this is, Megabro talks about FI plus, FI minus, TI plus, TI minus. I asked him a question in the comment about what's an example of TI plus used well. He indicated that Courtney was using TI plus there, and that it's the opposite of what I use all the time, TI minus. TI minus being parsing and understanding things by definitional exclusions and stuff like that. So I don't know exactly how these things all express according to Megabro, but I would say that in general he's saying that there's an affirmational approach to TI, which is trying to construct something by establishing things and building up a little proof of something, I would guess, and then the minus one being negationary. But the problem is, I think of my TI as being the same thing whether I'm affirming or negating, because I use it equally in both. So I don't really know what he means by that exactly. And as far as like, I like his quirk code a lot, which is not really represented here in these tables, because it says things like, gives things names, such as he'll say, this is an example of, he'll put like two of them together or something, TI minus, blah, 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 and he'll say, and it's called, he'll give it a name like excising a no longer needed component in the system, and it'll be like TE minus or something. I like that idea of labeling and categorizing instances of actual behavior in terms of descriptions of their teleology, basically, what their purpose is, what they're doing. I think it's very powerful, and it helps to remind us all that we need to move away from the metaphorical approaches, because that's when you get into like the horoscopy kind of aspects of things that just aren't really worth anything. It's important to remember that, and this is something I stress a lot when I talk about how to think about functions, is that there are a finite number of conscious hours in the day in which you are spending your attention on something and in some way. So it's not like when we talk about ourselves as characters, as beings that have things, rather than as beings that express things or be things, we can fall into this metaphor trap. And like, if somebody's spending all of their time doing, using NI as a tool function, like C.S. Joseph is, guys, here's the truth, let me express it to you, the truth. Well, then they're spending all their time using NI as a tool function. So if we're going to describe them as a type, we describe them as a type that uses NI as a tool function, because that's what they're doing with their time. Not because that's how they are or who they are or whatever, because that's what they're doing with their time. Is a much more concrete way of expressing things, right? So I like this aspect of Megabro's approach, because it reduces the function to an expression of behavior that's observable, and makes it much more scientific like that. Now, people will say, well, the Big Five is scientific like that in the same regard, because it's it's measuring things that purportedly are persistent behavioral habits of people and giving them a label like conscientiousness. The problem with the Big Five is that it's not explanatory of anything, and it's not really revelatory of anything. It just establishes a baseline against which you can make correlative links. And okay, that's fine enough, and it may be more data-based than the metaphorical approach to cognitive functions. But as you see here you saw there in the top chart, in the frames chart, there are a lot more than just that approaches to functions, and that's the one that people want to respond to. Like when people negate cognitive functions, they go, cognitive functions are this metaphorical frame right here, and I'm going to negate it. Well, congratulations. Yeah, that's, you know, it's easy to negate that. It's very worthy of negation. I just thought I'd throw in this too here. I've talked about value matrices before, and I think that that's an important way of understanding attentional manners, as that we do have, and this links back to teleology in the same way that Meg Rose does. It says we have fundamentally we're on the side of some things and against some things. When I say that TI is an instrumental value, what I mean is that ultimately I don't really care if something's consistent, as long as it gets me good FE and resonates well enough with NI. I think there we have those two absolute values as our third and fifth function. And the fifth one we normally use to legitimize against others, but we value it inherently anyway. And the third one we primarily use to get paid in. It's like I get paid in good FE mostly. Although as I mature and understand all this stuff more and meta into it, remember that the human experience is an open system, so we can understand our own experience and modify our own experience through knowledge, and as a consequence, my life's much richer and less autopilot-y than it was before, because I understand more accurately why and what I do. So anyway, this legitimization approach here says basically SE's legitimization is effect. If it has a big impact, then it's good. NE's legitimization is novelty. If it's new, if it's original or whatever, it's good. TE is efficiency. FE, affirmation, which means like others saying positive things about something. TI, agreement, which is to say consensual stuff. Like let's both use words to make sure we both know exactly what we are agreeing to here, and then agree to it. FI is preference. Well, I know what I prefer, and I want that to happen. NI is truth. That's different than agreement, and it's important to know that. The TI can be consistent and not true, because TI understands words as variables, basically, that can be defined differently for different purposes, whereas NI understands them as representational of things or ideas or objects of analysis or whatever, and so some ideas are truer than others in that regard. It treats words differently than TI does, which makes TI-NI types like INFJs, ENFJs an interesting combination of functions. INFJs being, in my opinion, generally more interesting than ENFJs, but both types being interesting. SI, familiarity is what I put down, but you could also say predictability. Like, I think Kimberly values predictability more than she values familiarity. Although, what do you think you value more, predictability or familiarity?
Predictability.
I think so too. I'm going to change that, predictability. Okay, so those are my little charts here, and I hope
I
that...
think I like to call it familiarity, but there's no way to be familiar with what I don't already know. So I'm always... Does that make sense?
That's true. There's no way to be... Wait, say it again?
I said there's no way... What did I say? I said there's no way to predict.
There's no way to... There's no way to... I don't know what you said. But I think predictability is right. You're not naturally very optimistic, so predictability allows you to be... to feel more safe in some regard. I don't know if this is true of all ISFJs, but I think I think that's why type is a bad way to really understand things. What I understand Kimberly is a particularist expression of someone who is foremost about predictability, legitimizes things by predictability, and so how she is depends on whether those predictions are of good outcomes or bad outcomes, and then it's a complex matrix of particularist experience that then defines how she
I said
expresses.
there's no way to be familiar with something that hasn't already happened.
There's no way to be familiar with something that hasn't already happened. That's a good point. Which means if it's already happened, that you can predict it's going to happen again.
Well, I think I do predict. I want to be able to predict, but I can't predict something that hasn't happened yet.
Well, what do you predict is going to happen after we're done with this video?
Eric, shut up.
I bet you if you predict right, Kim, your prediction will come true.
No, that's your prediction.
Well,
And that's
I'm just saying, Kim,
get off my tail.
Why don't you predict that you're going to love every second of it? Be squealing. Why don't you predict that, baby? All right, I guess you're not familiar enough with it. Ouch.
I'm familiar.
All right, anyway, thanks for watching. I think I'm going to put this up unedited. I don't really feel like doing the editing work. Hopefully it's good enough.